Welcome to the Gifts from the Edge podcast, where you are about to meet parents and professionals, educators and entrepreneurs who have taken the path less traveled, and by doing that, have made all the difference. Now it's time to step out of the ordinary. Here's your host, Andrew Lord.
Hello everyone and welcome. It is so good to be with you here again in this space. I'm sorry for being away for so long. I know that that's not the right thing to do after launching a brand new awesome podcast concept like Gifts from the Edge, to go AWOL. But I have been doing the soul care journey, which you're going to hear about in other episodes coming up. But I've been doing a lot of my own personal work, a lot of unpacking. And so that's the reason that there's been a big gap between this episode and the last episode. There's also been lots happening in my world: workshops, courses, classes, youth groups, and I've been doing these in partnerships with other people, and that's going to inform what I want to share with you guys today. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you would know that I worked very hard in the education system for a lot of years, trying to change the system from the inside out. You know, I wanted to deliver personalized, empowering learning experiences for young people. And as I learned more about life coaching, I wanted to deliver that for parents and for leaders as well. But unfortunately, no matter what I tried, I was unable to change the system from within. And that's where I stepped into the world of business to be able to try and change the system from without, offer unique personal development, enriching, empowering experiences in the world of business instead of the world of education. Now, I've often come back to the world of education and I, work there as a consultant or delivering educational programs. But that's where the concept of Gifts from the Edge has come from. Business in one sense has been my wilderness experience. I've gone off into this different world, and now I am able to come back to education and share something that's I think is pretty cool based on what I've learned. So that's what we're doing here today. I want to unpack something specifically with you, which is all about small groups, how to run small groups. And as I said, there's been lots going on in terms of workshops, courses, classes, and I've noticed that small groups generally are not done very well in the education setting, which is crazy because a lot of classes fall into that category of small groups. And when I'm talking about small groups, I'm talking around anything more than 6 to about 15. That's kind of the sweet spot of what a small group would look like. But we don't seem to be as comfortable delivering that as a small group. Usually we deliver it in the lecture style, which is where we have our people sitting out in front of us and we just deliver the information. We might ask some questions, try to get some engagement along the way, but most people show up to that feeling and thinking like it's a lecture style. The other type of setting that we have is where we have a small group, and it's designed to function like a small group, but it ends up functioning more like a one-on-one conversation, which is where everyone's sort of just, and usually people don't have the skills to function in that way because they're just trying to compete for airtime. You have some people who are dominating the conversation. And then other people who are just sort of withdrawn and they don't speak up because they don't feel confident in that setting. So you got these two extreme ends of the spectrum, and both of them obviously have pros and cons. But I think the small group model, in terms of expanding impact as well, I should have said that, usually we go for the lecture style or the speaker style because of its impact, because, we can get 100 people or 200 people or 1,000 people in a room and we can share our voice with them, share our story with them, and then that can have ripple effects going out. The downside is that the bigger the amount of people that you have there, often the lower the engagement, the lower investment that people have in the story that's being told. They feel they can show up, they can listen, but do they go away changed? Well, that's where people usually employ personal coaches. And then, okay, we're slipping back into that one-on-one relationship. But if we just stick to one-on-one coaching, then it's going to take a long time to have a significant impact in our community if we're just trying to help people one-on-one all the time. I know I've done that modality for a good while, and when you're trying to make a significant impact in the community, you can burn out really quickly doing that. So yeah, like I said, pros and cons to both models, but the small group model, this is what I want to unpack today. Not only, tell you what the right numbers are, but tell you how, or share with you how I have learned and developed some strategies along the way to get the most out of a small group and get them functioning in a way that it's not only you creating a small group atmosphere or positive atmosphere, but it's everyone. Everyone becomes a leader. Everyone becomes an owner of that small group. And when everyone owns the group, you've got a whole lot more buy-in, a whole lot more investment in that. All right, so let's get into some of those principles. I'm really excited to share these with you today. As you know, I normally would have speakers come in and present on the Gifts from the Edge podcast, but this is something that I feel really passionate about. So this is something I want to share with you. I'm going to share 3 points with you. I'm going to talk about the circle and the triangle. We're going to talk about leadership and culture being flip sides of the same coin. And we're also going to talk about perceptual positions. How your perspective and training other people to see from different perspectives can reshape the culture in your small group. All right, so let's get into it. Number 1, the triangle and the circle. Now, in the triangle, all knowledge, power, and responsibility and control is at the top, and it is delegated down. All right, we see this in our military system, in our hospital system, in our school system, in our company structures. We see this everywhere. All right, it's a product of our feudal heritage, and before that, I think you probably saw it in Roman times as well. It's come down through history, and the theory is that it's built for efficiency. It's built for accuracy, but the embedded assumption is, the same way that they had the assumption back in the Dark Ages, is that the people at the bottom know nothing. The people at the bottom have very little value. It's the people that at the top who have all knowledge, power, and responsibility and control, and they delegate that downwards. And people are always checking up. They're always checking up for what they need to do, for their sense of direction. And the side effect of always doing that is it's a dehumanizing structure. There's less going on side to side. You can have, in a company, for example, you can have whole departments that don't talk to other departments because they are managed through a central manager who is above them. And so the theory is that there's, efficiency and accuracy, accurate transfer of information. The theory is that it's a faster mode of communication. But what I have found, because it's a dehumanizing structure and communication is essentially a function of humanity, authentic communication is, then there's so much that gets lost in translation. So yeah, it might work well for simple systems, like, for example, let's say, sometimes I work at TAFE. So let's say I've got a technical problem, an IT problem. I can lodge a report. It goes up line to my to the IT department, and then they delegate someone to come and fix that. They fix the problem. They report that as fixed, and that report comes back to me. So there is like a back and forward that goes through like a central checking point, and that's pretty efficient. All right, but often what happens, even in that circumstance, is, if you know the guy, if you know the person who's on campus and who is able to fix it, you'll just give them an email or give them a call to say, hey, this is the problem. All right. So it's a dehumanizing structure. People are not looking within themselves or looking to God for answers. There's this, what I think is an unhealthy codependency that's developed when you operate in that triangle modality. In my experience, school has been very much an example of the triangle culture. And for those of you who have listened to my story, you would know that I was in business for a while. The business was really struggling. Sophia broke her shoulder and I needed to go back and to earn some money. And school was my obvious solution. It was, unpleasant for me to have to do that, but you know what life's like. Sometimes you just got to do the things that you don't want to do. And so I went back and they offered me this role doing some tutoring. And I said, yeah, sure, I'm happy to do that. And I'd never really done anything like that before. And what it turned out to be, it didn't make sense to come into a space where there's, 2 or 3 young people and say, all right, open your books. It didn't make sense to come in and do lecture style. What it made sense to do was to just check in with those young people and say, how was your weekend? What have you been up to? And so we would spend 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a 45-minute session, just finding out who they were as human beings. And a lot of those conversations moved to goals, aspirations, some of those bigger picture conversations. And I didn't realize it then. This is before I knew anything about life coaching, but I didn't realize it then, but I was stepping into a coaching model of operating. This is a small group model where we're connecting as human beings first, and then we move on to the content. And I'm going to talk more about why that's powerful in a minute. But for those of you who know the story, this group of young people who were doing tutoring with me went on to have massive growth in their learning, their literacy and numeracy. They ended up getting all sorts of awards. When the NAPLAN results came back, I hate standardized testing, but when the NAPLAN results came back, the school was just blown away by what had happened, and they were putting on assemblies, and I ended up winning some awards, and it was a big deal for them to see that sort of growth. But it all came from simply having conversations about the why behind their learning, having conversations about the goals, the aspirations, and these bigger picture reasons for learning. Once that was embedded, that was just an investment of time. Once that was set in place, the other academic style of learning just took off. And if you want to know more about that story, you can read it in the Thrive by Design book. I'll put a link to that just below wherever you're listening to the podcast. So traditional cultures have been doing the circle for millennia, all right? Traditional cultures generally don't operate in the triangle, they operate in the circle. Now in the circle, all knowledge, power, and responsibility and control is shared. It's shared equally amongst the participants. There's no delegation. Everyone contributes. And if every part doesn't contribute, the whole group lacks. The whole group suffers if there's one person who doesn't show up or doesn't want to contribute. And if everyone is bringing their best, then that's just an incredible atmosphere to be in. So the circle is how I do business in all of my programs, even when I'm working with adults, say in the Passion to Profit space, for example, we do a check-in, all right? We do a regular check-in because I know that in a class space, people show up as human beings. In the triangle way of thinking, the expectation is that you're an empty vessel and that you're going to show up ready to be poured in knowledge. But we know that's not the case. We know that people live lives outside our class. And so we check in with them, just like I did with those tutoring kids. We check in, get them to do some mindfulness activities, reflect on their week. How's their week going? How are they now? And our culture is formed by who we are together or how we are together. And unless we acknowledge where each person's at, then we're not going to be able to mindfully and consciously build our culture. And so that's the first point about small groups, just understanding the difference between the triangle and the circle, and understand that we have different tendencies, that we do tend to, because of our programming from our society and from our culture, we do tend to slip into the triangle way of doing things. And so if we're conscious of that, we can deliberately move back into the circle. But how do we do that? How do we move from a triangle way of thinking into a circle way of thinking? Well, one idea or one concept that I think is really helpful for that is the perceptual positions. Now, if you've done my Dangerous Minds course, you could probably just Google it as well if you want to, but I'm going to unpack it a little bit for you. If you've done my Dangerous Minds course, there's a module in there called Perceptual Positions, and it's P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5. I'm going to go through these very briefly with you, but then we're going to dig deeper into the P1, P2, and P3. So P1 is your self-talk. All right, we're all very familiar with our self-talk. We've got it going on in our head all the time. Even while you're listening to me on this podcast, you still might have P1 chipping in here and there. Whenever I say something and it triggers an idea or a memory or an experience that you've had, P1's going to, speak up. So that form of self-talk, that's P1. All right, P2 is when we are listening. And I don't just mean listening to gather information, but really listening to empathize with the other person, really trying to step in to the other person's shoes. So if you're in the other person's position, if I'm telling a story, for example, and you're feeling the things that I feel, that means that you're in P2. And, just understanding P1 and P2 can be a powerful tool to help you in your relationships. Think about a marriage relationship in particular. I've seen people having conversations, married couple, and I know I've done it for myself as well, married couples, both in P1. And there's no communication happening. They're just both in their P1 position, and they're both trying to have their voice heard, but no one's getting into P2. So just understanding these first two positions can be really helpful, and taking turns in those positions can be really helpful for upping your level of communication in spaces like marriage. P3 is called the fly on the wall perspective, and I also refer to it as the leader's perspective. So when I'm out running a group, for example, I'm running a workshop, I might be talking, I might be listening, someone else might be talking to me. So there could be this P1, P2 dynamic going on, but there's a part of my brain and a part of my awareness that is able to get into P3. And I kind of imagine it as going up a little bit higher and sort of hovering above the group where I can see everything that's going on. And although I might be fully engaged, fully listening to one other person and what they're saying, I might also be noticing one person who is maybe disengaging from the group. Maybe they've just pulled themselves away and they're sitting on their own now. And I make a mental note of that. So I'm fully engaged, I'm fully listening, having a conversation with someone, but I'm also in P3. I'm also aware of what's going on somewhere else. So that when that conversation is done, there's like a little a point on my to-do list that I've got to go and re-engage that person. I've got to go and check in with them. How are they going? What's happening for them? And, have a P1, P2 conversation with them. So P3 is always kind of moving about and noticing the different dynamics that are going on between people. P3 doesn't always listen so much as it notices. It notices body language. It notices different tones in conversations, all right, and it's picking up on some of those things that are not necessarily spoken. So that's the P3 perspective. P4 perspective, which we're not going to go in detail today, and P5. P4 is an organizational perspective. So if I'm running my business or if I'm running a company and I have to think from an organizational perspective or a governmental perspective, that's what P4 is. And P5 is the creator or the narrator perspective. This is God's perspective. So it sits outside of time. It can see beginning to end. It can understand why certain things are happening. And when we operate from a P5 perspective, I find that one's a really powerful one to understand challenges that we might be facing, because we start to look, we stop asking that why question, why is this happening to me? And we start to look, in a fuller perspective where our life is a story. And this is one of the downs or the challenges that every hero has to face. So that can be a really helpful perspective as well. But P1, P2, and P3 are really powerful in a small group if you can train your small group to think in all of these different ways. And just, it's a pretty simple concept, P1, P2, P3. You can teach your small group about these three positions and ask them to make sure that they are thinking in those ways. Now, obviously, if you're facilitating a small group, there is a greater responsibility that you're able to operate in P3. Notice who's speaking, who's not speaking, those sorts of things. But you also want to empower every person in your group to think from P3 as well. You want them to notice if someone's not speaking or if someone's dominating. And everyone can be a leader in that space. It doesn't have to be the facilitator that invites that quiet person to contribute. It can be, the person sitting across from that person who just says, what do you think, Joe? Or what do you think, Sally? Bring that person into the conversation. So one way that I think of it is, and I got this from the Stronger, Smarter Leadership program, awesome program if you ever get the opportunity to take it. Take turns, make turns, monitor the themes of the conversation. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Take turns, make turns, and monitor the themes of the conversation. So take turns is P1. That's where you're speaking. You're making sure that you are contributing. Make turns is where you get quiet and you switch your mind to listening. You'll often have people in one person usually in a small group where when somebody says something, they automatically overlay their experience over the top of that. In fact, we all do that. It's very natural. That's the P1 perspective. But we need to consciously shift ourselves out of P1, okay? Because especially if it comes out our mouth, oh, that happened to me and this is what I did in that experience. That's slipping back into P1, and it's not your turn to be speaking in P1. We don't necessarily need to hear your experience. I know usually that person who's giving their experience is trying to help that person, and sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's appropriate, but really, if someone's speaking, what they really need is to be heard. They really need someone to be in P2 and listening to them and feeling what they feel. And often the best response is, wow, I understand what you're feeling. I know what that's like. Without telling them why just, I understand. And that moment of connection can do so much more than 100 different words of advice that might come through for all sorts of different reasons. And monitor the themes of the conversation. That's P3. That's noticing what is going on. So as one person speaks, as another person speaks, as another person speaks, there begins to be a theme or an energy or an atmosphere or something emerging, a story beginning to emerge. There's connections that are happening within between these people. It's noticing the in-between spaces. What's the story that's being told collectively as the group shares? So for the facilitator, we need to be mindful of that, but we want to train every single person in the group to notice that. From the Christian perspective, I've got something up on my wall here. It says, to To him who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. It's almost like there's a spirit within every group. And Jesus says, if there's 2 or 3 gathered, there I am in the midst of it. So there's this unspoken thing that's being told amongst the spaces between people, amongst the connections, and as the stories come through. So that's P3. P3 needs to monitor the different themes of the conversation. And that's so powerful when, as a group, not just the facilitator, but as a group, people can start to notice that. And that leads me to the third point, which is leadership and culture are flip sides of the same coin. That's a quote by Edgar Schein. And if you're interested in this stuff, I encourage you to go and look up Edgar Schein. I'll put some links on the blog where you can go and learn more about some of his modalities, which are really cool, really helpful for understanding why culture is the way that it is. He's done a lot of research and a lot of study in that area, and I found reading some of his material really helpful. But leadership and culture being flip sides of the same coin, it's kind of just springboarding off what we've just talked about with P3, monitoring the themes of the conversation. So if you're a leader, if you're a change maker, if you're a facilitator, and you're using the small group modality, the culture is how we are together. It's the atmosphere. It's the vibe. I've got a whole bunch of young people that rip me off when I say the vibe, because it's a reference back to that old movie, The Castle, which is an awesome movie. But the energy that's in the room, how we are together. What's the experience that we have? What's the collective story that we're telling? That culture and leadership are flip sides of the same coin. I'll say that again. That culture, that collective story that we're telling, and leadership are flip sides of the same coin. So a leader, a person who is able to function well in P3, I prefer the term facilitator when I'm talking about small groups, because leader often conjures up that P1, I'm a speaker at the front of the room, kind of, or I'm a consultant in a one-on-one relationship, giving you advice, telling you what to do, although it's not accurate, conjures up those terms. But the real leader who is a listening leader, is able to consciously and deliberately, expertly create a culture amongst a group of people by asking smart questions, by gently directing the themes of the conversation, by making sure that every person in that space has a voice. That's what a good leader or a good facilitator will do. So they're my 3 points: the circle and the triangle, understanding the different frames that we can use when we get into a small group. Avoid falling into the trap of, thinking like a speaker, where you have to deliver the information, which it's easy to do. When we're in a group setting, a small group setting, or a class setting, or running a workshop, we often feel that we need to be in that P1 space. And don't get me wrong, when I run a workshop, that's often, the way that I'm operating. I'm delivering information. But if at some point I don't introduce the circle, then I know that I'm going to be giving a lot less value to the people, to the participants. And I know that they're not going to engage in the same way if I don't create that circle space, because I want to see change. I want these people to walk away from the group with changed lives. And so in order to change lives, we have to change thinking and change actions. All right. And we're not going to change thinking and changing actions unless we get people to actually engage in what we're sharing. So the circle is a powerful way of doing that. The perceptual positions is a way of creating culture, because you're getting every person to start thinking a little bit differently about how they listen and how they create spaces for other people. All right. And the culture that exists in a group is a reflection of your work as a leader. So that's That's a challenge, I think. When we see a small group, we might have a small group. There might be one person who's a little bit extra dominant, or one person who's not contributing. That's a reflection of what you are doing as a leader. So that's a challenge then to you to get into P3 more and consider, okay, how am I going to bring this person up? How am I going to get this person to contribute and be a part of the circle and feel confident that they can share, and that what they have to share is of value? And how can I get this person who is dominating to leave space for other people? What's the reason that they feel that they need to share or overshare or offer advice to lots of other people? What's going on for them? What are the questions that I need to ask them? Or do I need to speak with them one-on-one to help them to unpack some of those things that are going on for them? These are the internal conversations of a leader. So I hope you found that helpful. I know I've gathered these 3 principles over lots and lots of years, but I know that they have been super helpful. And I know that when people get into group spaces with me or walk away from group spaces with me, number 1, they feel transformed. But number 2, they say that was different to any other space that I've been in. And of course it's different because it's me, because we're all unique and we all deliver things in a different way. But I think the main reason that they think that it's different is because not a lot of people know how to function in that small group space. We slip into the one-on-one style, or we slip into the big speaker style. Okay, so that's what I'm encouraging you to do. If you are a parent, you are a leader. If you run a youth group, you are a leader. If you are a believer and you want to share your beliefs with your friends, if you run a business, then of course you are a leader. All of you are leaders in your own different way. So I want you to think about some of these concepts. Think about how they might apply in different aspects of your life. Think about how you can make some small changes to the way you do business. Thank you so much for being here. Once again, apologies for the big gap between the last podcast and this one. I am super committed to bringing you more stories, more value, more uplifting content in this space. So make sure you subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, make sure you subscribe. Reach out and tell me what you think about this episode. I'd love to hear from you. Definitely we'll have a conversation if you want to. And if you want to have a deeper conversation, there's a link right below where you can book a call. If you would like me to come and help you with your small group, we can talk about how that can happen. So book a call with me. I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to have a conversation. That's all from me for today. Hope you have a wonderful week. Bye for now.